Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the fireworks from yesterday's debate in the House of Commons as Jeremy Hunt tried to take on Rachel Reeves only to find her firing back. Reminds me of the way Labour and the Conservatives sort of jousted one another with roles reversed after the 2010 election, but with one big difference. Back then, the Tories tried to claim that their tax rises and spending cuts were forced on them by Labour's handling of the economy in government. The difference here is that Labour's argument is true. The Office for Budgetary Responsibility and Institute for Fiscal Studies have both basically confirmed that the large hole in the budget was indeed not known about before the election and that the government effectively concealed it from the public and from them. In fact, there was even more criticism from Simon Case, the outgoing Cabinet Secretary, who looks like he's a bit sick and tired of the way his reputation has been destroyed by allowing himself to be hired by Boris Johnson. In response to a letter from Jeremy Hunt, Case responded that the Tories messed up the finances by not holding a spending review since 2021, despite major events creating new economic pressures, which is a fair point. Like, it is usual to have spending reviews every few years. You don't have them every year. But if something happens which causes a major hit to the economy, something you couldn't have predicted when the last spending review took place and is going to have a major impact on the finances, you would expect the next spending review to be brought forward. And since the last spending review, we've had the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and Liz Truss to contend with. Also, we were supposed to have had the next spending review at the start of this year anyway, before Hunt presented his spring budget. He decided to hold it off, and that decision to not hold one until after the election, as I said at the time, was effectively the Tories sticking their heads in the sand about the state of the country's finances. So although the political dance seems familiar when compared to 2010, the tune's a bit different because Labour have got plenty of independent corroboration for their claim that the Tories not only screwed the finances worse than thought, but concealed the evidence ahead of the election. And when the Tories, like Hunt, cry foul, all it does is invite Labour, as Rachel Reeves did yesterday, to point out that what we haven't heard is a single apology for the mess that the Tories left behind, basically. And this is one of the big problems the Conservatives have got. It's not hard to find a Conservative MP, or even former MP, saying, well, the party failed the voters, quite right that we were kicked out of government, we understand why. Even the leadership candidates are sort of open about that, as long as you don't ask them follow-up questions. Because if you do ask them, so, okay, what exactly did you fail them on? None of them want to say the economy. Remember, the Tories' most powerful weapon is the way they've convinced the British public to somehow see them as the default party of economic competence when the economic data says otherwise. So they will happily admit to having failed on immigration, on housing, on healthcare, on net zero, although they disagree about which way. But they don't seem to want to admit failure on the economy, even though this is the policy which most of the public see as the Tories' greatest failure. And it's partly why the Tories got themselves into a huge mess during the debate yesterday. Not just Hunt, various other MPs as well. They were trying to beat Labour over the head with the cost of borrowing figures, for example. But the cost of borrowing figures that they were using were those while the Tories were still in power. In fact, there's going to be little Labour can do about them for some time to come. But the figures right now that they're using are the ones for which Labour were not in government for. It's why you might have expected them to wait a few months at least before trying to use economic data. At least wait until the data is coinciding with when Labour are in power. And then hope that enough of the public think that they can change things overnight that you can make an argument. And also their attacks on public sector pay. That was coming out yesterday. I mean, that's just awkward. Because on the one hand, many Tories, they like to say, oh, you know, when they were sort of arguing for why nurses couldn't be paid more, for example, just a year or so ago, they would say, well, we've accepted the recommendations of the public review bodies. That's what they say. We accept the recommendations of this independent public, this pay review body. And they are independent, but they are also independently applying guidelines set by the government. But when they want an excuse to keep pay down, oh, yeah, we follow the recommendations. But here they're attacking Labour for accepting those same recommendations. Something Labour should probably highlight a bit more. But the Tories are going to have to address their economic legacy if ever they're to convince voters to treat them seriously. In this, I mean, they've got two options in theory, but both of these theories are bad. The first is to deny that they left behind a terrible economic legacy. This is the line that they are going with at the moment. They even have the nerve to claim, actually, they've left Labour with a strong economic legacy. But the public aren't buying it. They often don't. The public didn't buy that Labour did well with the banking crisis in 2010, despite the fact that loads of international bodies said so. So the public certainly aren't going to believe the Tories when the mess is way more noticeably worse, and where any independent body that has anything to say on the matter is highly critical of the Tories. And the problem with this line is that if it's not working now, it's really hard to see how it's going to work in a few years' time come the next election, particularly if Labour do start to deliver noticeable improvements. They will doubtless claim, actually, no, these improvements are actually all ours. We spent 14 years really putting you under the cosh just so that at this point we were going to get these improvements. So they will claim that Labour are just reaping the benefits of the Tories' efforts, but I don't think many people are going to be daft enough to believe that. The second option is to acknowledge the mistakes, which are evident to the public at least. You don't have to complain on everything politics, but at least admit to the mistakes, which is evident to the public, give the impression of contrition, oh, very sorry, and then suggest ways in which they will ensure it never happens again. For example, Labour's Budget Responsibility Bill, that is about legislating to force ministers to be held to a higher level of scrutiny. Now, why would a government legislate to put themselves under more scrutiny? That ordinarily would seem like a mad thing. It's what I keep saying when people talk about, you know, how come when an MP does this, it's not a serious criminal offence, or a minister does this? You know, if a CEO of a company did this, they'd go to prison. How come when a minister does it, they don't? And I keep saying, because governments tend not to legislate to make their own behaviour criminal, right? They tend to give themselves a light touch. So why would a government, a newly formed government, come in and straight away legislate to shine a harsher spotlight on their budget decisions? Because it was a good way of Labour demonstrating that it wasn't intending any funny business by making sure there'd be an independent body breathing down their necks, paying very careful attention to everything they were doing and reporting it all to Parliament and the public. It's a way of giving the public confidence that they intended to play a very straight bat. The Tories may well have to do something similar themselves, but they don't seem ready right now. And, you know, and there should be easy lines of attack for the Conservatives against Labour. Like the big political hot potato at the moment, of course, is the winter fuel allowance. And yet, the Tories can't really get a handle on that. Should be easy for them. Oh, you're taking away these things from poor old pensioners. And yet what happens? Inevitably what happens? Now the news comes out that Kemi Badenoch 2 years ago said, yeah, you know what we should do? We should means test winter fuel payments. So the Tories front runner to be leader, even though, as I say, between you and I don't think she's going to be the leader, but who knows? But she's certainly billed as the front runner of the Conservative to lead the Conservative Party in a couple of months. She is on record as having said, albeit surreptitiously recorded, that, yeah, we should do what basically Labour have done. So they completely undermine their own argument. So they can't get a handle on anything. And when you consider the economy and standard of living is voters' #1 priority, it's a big reason why people think that the next election could be very similar to 2001. In 2001, as Labour won their second term, the Conservatives only gained a net increase of 1 seat. It's not just that they didn't come straight back to power. They didn't even move. They'd lost very badly in 1997 and lost just as badly in 2001, like 1 seat extra net. Easy to assume that many of the Tory voters who just stayed at home this year would be influential at the next election. They'll come back after 4 or 5 years. In opposition, the new Tory leadership might look more competent, even if it's not. Just because their ideas are not being put into practice and being smashed against the wall of reality, you know, many conservative-minded voters may think, oh, yeah, this would work, this would work. And because it's hypothetical, they don't realise it won't. You know, as a result, you may imagine dozens of seats will flip back and the Tories will at least become a stronger opposition. But it didn't happen in 2001. And it could happen in 2028 or 2029, but it's not guaranteed. And then you also consider other things. Anti-Tory tactical voting, that's way more organised now. Now, the motivation will be weaker, I think, with the Tories in opposition. I don't think there'll necessarily be as many voters who want to tactically vote against the Tories at the next election. But there will still be people who want to keep the Tories in opposition, and data-driven tactical voting advice will help them. And of course, because the Tories lost so many younger voters, when I say younger voters, I don't just mean 20s and 30s, I mean 50s, even people in their 50s. That because the Tories had to rely so much on just elderly voters, mortality rates will hit them very hard at the next election as well. It's really hard to see how the Tories chart a path back whilst deliberately avoiding talking about their own economic legacy in a way that the public will believe. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.